Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, may I please take this opportunity to call the meeting to order and request you to be seated. As you can see from the schedule, we have a very, very tight schedule. Not that we want to take your money in the right hand and not say thank you in the left hand, or I mean take your money with the left hand, but because of the fact that a lot of the excellencies here just have the amount of time indicated on the schedule. And therefore, we will call upon Her Excellency, the Director General, as Ambassador Willis. Okay.
Thank you very much, Engineer Mahbub. Your Excellency, Ambassador Amina Mohammed, Cabinet Secretary of the Republic of Kenya, Honorable Ministers, the Under Secretary General, Head of UNOCHA, Valerie Amos, Engineer Mahbub, Executive Secretary of IGAD, invited guests, Excellencies, Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. Mine will be just 1 minute to welcome you to the United Nations office at Nairobi, the United Nations headquarters in Africa. And I would like to thank the co-organizers, the United Nations and IGAD, for having chosen Nairobi for the venue of this meeting. But it's only appropriate that UNON has been chosen to host this meeting because the role of UNON as a major hub for the region cannot be underestimated. UNON, as I said, is one of the most important hubs, and many operations of the United Nations for the region has been done from here, be it for Somalia, and you remember Lifeline Sudan for Sudan, and now for South Sudan. So I think that's very befitting and appropriate to have it done here, and thank you very much for choosing this place. But UNON's role is not limited to this one. I mean, the political aspect of it is important, so is it for South Sudan. So we have the good offices, we have done it in Malawi, and also support for major crises here. And I would think of the Kampala process, Kampala peace talks between the government of the DRC and the M23. But we're very happy to have you here. And here in Kenya, I would say, Kenya, which is a major, a key member of the United Nations, a key player, which has played a big role in finding solutions to the many crises here in the region. And I would think of Somalia, of course, and South Sudan, both within IGAD and also as current head of the East African community. So I think it's very appropriate to see how we can now assist the displaced and the refugees in South Sudan. So once again, thank you very much, and my best wishes for this meeting, and wishing you a very successful outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Excellency Ambassador Salwork. Colleagues, Your Excellency Under Secretary General, Valerie Amos, Your Excellency, our guest, Mr. Forrest Whitaker, Ambassador Amina, Cabinet Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kenya, Minister Barnaba. I'll take those two from our IGAD ministerial executives present here, one being the host, the other one being representing the country that is being assisted here this afternoon, but recognizing the leadership of IGAD countries present here, ambassadors, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'll try to be pretty short also. I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of IGAD community to thank all of you so much for once again being together with us to show solidly the resolve that we have made together to ensure that we try our best, despite the fact that the issues that are at hand in South Sudan have been described mainly as political in nature, to ensure that we do not move from political crisis to humanitarian crisis. And the fact that you've helped us keep this on the international radar screens for too long. We thank you. We do not take your time for granted. We thank you so much. We followed the good work that was done right from Oslo to New York to several other places in the world to this one where you have greatly honored us to be able to host along with Her Excellency Baroness. And to thank Baroness in person for having led this activity of the emergency coordination and response for our region, to use a pastoralist terminology from the front. The leader of the pastoral herd is supposed to stay at the front. The young boys and girls who are supposed to cane the animals to follow track are supposed to stay at the back. And therefore, Baroness, I think you have led from the front. We thank you so much. We thank our member states for the partnership, for the support, for the political leverage they give me every day, every time, for opening their doors to people who are from our region, who need our help at this time, and to bear the brunt through hosting refugees and other groups who require safety. But just to say that on the political front, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I think the status is that agreement on the establishment of transitional government of national unity has been reached. The aspects of security arrangements and that of aspects of transitional justice with accountability has been agreed upon. Parties have agreed to expedite this consultation and finalize the comprehensive agreement not later than 5th of March. I think in a nutshell, this I think is the topmost progress that we can put our finger on ever since we started these mediation processes. But as I said, we stand the risk of being accused to be too politically supportive as opposed to humanitarian, and that's why Her Excellency Baroness is here with our guest, Mr. Forrest Whitaker, and the rest of you. We want to ask you to pledge once more and to ensure that we really look at this as we have done before on the seriousness it deserves and to ensure that our humanitarian groups on the ground are able to move. I think with those remarks, introductory remarks, please allow me to take this opportunity to call Ambassador Amina Mohammed, Cabinet Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Trade of the Republic of Kenya, who have gracefully honored to host this for us. I'm told she arrived this morning or this afternoon from Europe. If I were her, probably I'll be in bed now. But Amina, thank you so much. Kindly take the floor.
Thank you. I hope that does it. Thank you very, very much, Engineer Mahbub. Let me recognize the Director General of our office at Nairobi, Her Excellency Sahle-Work Zewde, Ms. Valerie Amos, Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mr. Forrest Whitaker, and I think all of us are quite pleased to see him here. Most of us have only seen him on the big screen, so it was really a pleasure to have you here and to know that you actually share in this responsibility towards our brothers and sisters in South Sudan. Mr. Peter Manfield, the head of United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, my colleagues from IGAD, and we have, as you can see, Ethiopia. We have the Honorable Minister from Sudan. We have the Ambassador of Djibouti. We have the Minister of State from the Sudan, and we have the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uganda. So we are all here as partners and neighbors of South Sudan. Let me thank all of you for being here. I think if South Sudan needed any evidence, any proof that it has many friends, that it has many well-wishers, and that it has many partners, I think all that my brother needs to do is look around the room and see how many people have come from outside Nairobi to be with us here today. So I think we are all very, very pleased to welcome you and to thank you. Thank you for being here. Let me thank IGAD, the IGAD Secretariat, and UNOCHA for convening this critical meeting to deliberate on the plight of millions of South Sudanese who have been displaced as a result of the conflict in their country. The humanitarian situation in South Sudan remains dire. Nearly 2 million people have been displaced, while approximately 500,000 people have fled to neighboring countries as refugees. I was just looking at the pamphlet that has been prepared here, and I think the figures are even larger than the ones that I'm quoting. The humanitarian crisis we are witnessing involves the exposure of displaced persons to disease, to severe food insecurity, and to malnutrition. The frequent violation of the cessation of hostilities agreement has hampered the delivery of humanitarian assistance, has complicated and in some cases totally blocked access to displaced persons and to refugees, and exposed them to serious protection concerns. It has also placed humanitarian workers at great risk. There is real danger that the situation will continue to deteriorate before it gets better, that the number of displaced persons and refugees will increase, that famine will be precipitated, and millions of people will be exposed to severe food insecurity and even death. It's therefore imperative that steps are urgently taken to avert the humanitarian catastrophe in South Sudan, and we are counting on all of you to support those in the region to ensure that we don't lose any more sisters and brothers. And I'd like to commend the humanitarian agencies that are engaged in South Sudan. We were talking earlier on with Valerie Amos, and she talked about the courage, the strength, the resilience, and the commitment of the people on the ground. And I'd really like to appreciate that. In fact, through their efforts, millions of innocent lives have been saved. I urge the international community to step up support to these humanitarian activities by contributing what has been requested by the UN, by humanitarian agencies, by IGAD. In fact, I think the figure that has been given to us of what is required urgently to start addressing this potential catastrophe is $1.8 billion US dollars. I know that many of you have been generous, you have given before, and we really would like to plead that you remain generous to just ensure that we don't lose any more lives. Now, for the South Sudanese, both the government and those in opposition, I think we all need to be very clear that the violation of the cessation of hostilities agreement that was signed on the 23rd of January 2014 will no longer be tolerated. I think after the agreement that was signed in Addis Ababa a few days ago, we actually expect it to be honored and implemented so that humanitarian access is not hampered. But also so that we can actually begin the process of rebuilding that country, we can deal with the political issues that caused the conflict to arise in the first place. And so we also expect, obviously, the government of South Sudan, the others in South Sudan, to ensure that, as we plead with the international community to support us, that they do what is needed, what they're committed to, what they signed on to ensure that these agreements are implemented. Now, as you probably know, the agreement an agreement was signed in South Sudan that was intended to ensure that we have a transitional government not later than the 9th of July. It was signed by both His Excellency President Salva Kiir Mayardit and Dr. Riek Machar. It spells out the mandate of the transitional government, the duration of the transitional government, which it gave as 30 months, preceded by a pre-transitional period of 3 months. It also contains aspects of the transitional security arrangements, justice, accountability, reconciliation, and healing. We included a joint monitoring and evaluation commission that would ensure that all the agreements that were entered into would be implemented, and the completion of negotiations, including dealing with the outstanding issues, and a time frame was given so that all this would be completed by the 5th of March. So I think all of us must sustain engagement with the South Sudanese parties to make sure that this agreement is totally honored. We also need to provide the support that is required to ensure that the agreement is implemented. And my brother is sitting next to me here. He knows that he will need support to implement these agreements. I want to assure him that IGAD stands ready to provide that support, to provide that shoulder, but we also hope that the commitments that were made will be respected. In conclusion, let me say that I reiterate my government's commitment to the peace process, to support to the long-term stability and security of South Sudan. As a country, we will continue to extend political and diplomatic support, as well as continue to provide humanitarian assistance to our brothers and sisters in South Sudan. I remember that when the conflict broke out on the 15th of December, 2013, Kenya was actually the first country that took in humanitarian support. That commitment has stayed on, it's remained, and it will continue until peace is found and security is maintained and stability is reinstated. So with those few remarks, I'd just like to again call upon the parties to the conflict to continue to think and never for 1 minute to forget the dehumanizing suffering that has been inflicted on our brothers and sisters in South Sudan. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cabinet Secretary Amina. May I now call upon Her Excellency and Secretary General, the Co-Chair, to make her remarks.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Foreign Minister Mohammed, thank you for your welcome to Nairobi. Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Whitaker, the UNESCO Special Envoy for Peace and Reconciliation, and I have just completed a 3-day visit to South Sudan. And we'd like to thank you all very much for being here at such short notice. But my remarks will be by way of an introduction in terms of what we were able to see in South Sudan. We saw firsthand the continuing widespread devastation and destruction caused by the conflict. Yesterday we were in Wai. People are exhausted, emotionally and physically. Many have had to move several times and had walked for days to reach an area of relative safety. They were in desperate need of food, water, healthcare, education for their children. We were able to see the life-saving work of humanitarian organizations which in the last few days have been providing those basic services. There is a human face to this tragedy which we all need to remember. The humanitarian situation has worsened dramatically in the year since my last visit. Nearly 2.5 million people are suffering from severe undernourishment. There are ongoing and credible reports of serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. Women raped on their way to collect water. Children recruited to fight instead of going to school. Humanitarian aid reached 3.6 million South Sudanese last year. Humanitarian partners contained a cholera epidemic and vaccinated nearly 1 million children against measles and polio. The United Nations peacekeeping mission continues to shelter over 100,000 displaced people in its protection of civilian sites. All this was possible thanks to the generous support of the international community, including IGAD member states. Almost 500,000 South Sudanese have sought refuge in neighbouring countries, most living in border areas with limited access to food and basic services. And my thanks to those countries for keeping their borders open. This is a conflict which has had a devastating impact on the people of South Sudan, but if peace doesn't come quickly, it will also have a significant regional impact. Colleagues and friends, we all know how important it is to stand with the people of South Sudan. Every day we speak of their strength, their courage, their resilience. They have had to endure an untenable level of suffering, circumstances in which they should not have to be resilient. So what can be done? We need the fighting to stop and peace restored. IGAD and the international community must continue to put pressure on the parties to end the violence. The people of South Sudan need to be put first. They must be protected. The government of South Sudan needs, as a matter of urgency, to tackle the economic crisis facing the country. With the reduction in oil production and the fall in the oil price, there is a drop in the resources available to invest in essential sectors like health and education. And we again turn to our donors to support our appeal. Last year, we raised $1.4 billion, 78% of what we asked for, the highest amount for any global appeal last year. This year, we need $1.8 billion, 600 million of it by the end of February to pre-position supplies before the rain starts. And we need a further 809 million this year to help the South Sudanese refugees and host communities in Ethiopia, Kenya, Sudan, and Uganda. But nothing is more important than peace. South Sudan's leaders need to show their people in the world that they are committed to securing that peace. South Sudan is a country rich in talent and resources. We do not want to lose a generation of South Sudanese children. Help us to help them achieve a bright and a secure future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Co-Chair. May I now please call upon His Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of South Sudan, Dr. Barnaba Marial Benjamin. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Executive Engineer Mahbub Muallim, Executive Secretary of IGAD, Your Excellency Baroness Valerie Amos, UN Under-Secretary General and Emergency Relief Coordinator, distinguished delegates, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Indeed, let me at the outset express my deep appreciation and gratitude with humility to Your Excellencies, the heads of delegations who are here present, the UNOCHA, members of the NGO community, the representatives of various governments here present, and particularly to my colleagues in the IGAD member countries, including, of course, IGAD Secretariat, for especially organizing this important humanitarian assistance and relief to the people of the Republic of South Sudan. I would like also to thank very much Baroness Valerie Amos, and especially with the presence of Forrest Whitaker, a gentleman who has done a lot in my country, trying to assist the young people, the youth in particular, which we deeply cherish in our country. It's nice seeing you here in Nairobi. I must also indeed express my thanks of appreciation to the presence of Valerie here, because in New York, during the UN General Assembly, September 2014, Her Excellency had indicated that she would visit Juba, which indeed she did fulfill. And I must use this opportunity to appreciate your resolve to help assist the people of South Sudan. With the full knowledge of our responsibilities, ladies and gentlemen, and commitment that lies ahead all of us, I would like to extend to Your Excellencies the greetings of my President, General Salva Kiir Mayardit, his government, and the people of the Republic of South Sudan, for your collective decision. This is a collective decision in meeting together to raise your humanitarian contributions, both financial and material. The people of South Sudan can always count on your full support and cooperation in averting humanitarian emergencies and crises, as your efforts demonstrated during the Oslo Donor Conference in Norway that raised over $610 million to help our people. In Oslo, as you remember, we had organized 4 working groups. 1, assess to accelerate, to create a better environment for the delivery of aid. 2, funding to identify needy resources to respond to worsening conditions in my country. 3, protection of civilians. And 4, the plight of refugees in neighboring countries. These were the 4 highlights we had decided in Oslo, we today can confidently say that we have fulfilled these requirements. I would like to thank the governments of Kenya, Ethiopia, Egypt, Uganda, Sudan, and many other countries for providing refuge for our people. I would like to point out the importance of collaboration against various actors in the management of humanitarian funds for South Sudan and an important mechanism of accountability and transparency for the beneficiaries as well as the donors. I would like also to recognize the efforts IGAD in collaboration with United Nations, especially Executive Secretary, in holding this as a continuation, as we are reminded, those of us who gathered in Washington, D.C. on the 12th of April 2014 for a call for action that was followed by Oslo Donor Conference 19 to 20th of May 2014. I want also to thank the Norwegian Foreign Minister, who is not here, but his delegation, for indeed successfully raising that earlier contribution of 610 million, adding to further 500 committed, which made 1.2 billion, sought by aid agencies. Our thanks also go to all the participating governments. Your Excellency is indeed a reality of the concept of the global village we are gathered here today, where the principle of sharing between the haves and the have-nots is a godly commitment and indeed a guiding moral voluntary responsibility. And I think that's why we are here today. Allow me also to express thanks to the government and the people of the Republic of Kenya, especially the personality of His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, his Cabinet Secretary of Foreign Affairs, once again, and as usual, extending to all of us the usual generous and exceptional hospitality to hold this great meeting. Your Excellency, distinguished guests, we know the incidents on December 15, 2013. A conflict erupted that started as an attempted failed coup in Juba that developed then into a rebellion, especially in the states, 3 states out of 10, states of Jonglei, of course, Upper Nile, and Unity State. We are aware, an overall figure, as said earlier by the Baroness, that at least 2.5 million people is projected to face emergency and crisis food insecurity levels between 1st of April up to July 2015. South Sudan is also providing protection of about 249,956 refugees in our country, of which 91% come from the Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, 6% of this number, Ethiopia, 2%, and Central African Republic, 1%. These refugees also need your attention and assistance. Of course, according to updated projections, while we're here today, we note that the distribution of food across the country has shifted. The major factors to all of us, of course, the conflict that has caused a lot of disruption. 2, the high stable food prices and impact of the fall of oil prices in the international market. Number 3, the population displacement, disruption in crop production. We have high malnutrition in the affected states of Upper Nile, Unity, and Jonglei State. The communities' agricultural activities have been disrupted by the conflict, especially in these particular regions, resulting in a downgrading of projected food insecurity. So there are both natural resources that have impacted. Recent nutritional assessments show that the nutrition situation remains above the normal levels. Your Excellencies, we believe my government's intervention efforts in this emergency crisis is clear. Commitment, and I will repeat again, the government is committed to pursue peace in the country through the IGAD mediation process. And I can assure my colleague, the Foreign Minister of Kenya, that we are committed to the IGAD peace process. Already, we have signed areas of agreement on the establishment of the Transitional Government of National Unity in the Republic of South Sudan. Recently in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, we hope to sign the final comprehensive peace agreement by the parties as the peace negotiators will resume on the 19th of this month in order to have a comprehensive final settlement. We accelerate bilateral agreements for humanitarian corridors that we have started, neighboring countries, and as said much earlier, through Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Uganda, we have opened up our corridors in order for delivery of food. There's continuous mobilization of humanitarian aid to support IDPs in Bantu, Bor, Juba, and Malakal. Nearly 100,000 people already. The government is assisting those willing to go back to their homes. And out of these IDP camps in this town, a good number of people is already responding, going back home to their stations. Secondly, we strengthen coordination with the state's authorities for a conducive working environment for humanitarian workers, including well food programs, so that they can easily deliver their food assistance in those areas. We have facilitated and encouraged safe return of IDPs to their homes, and the government is contributing its effort in that. On the political front, Your Excellencies, His Excellency Salva Kiir Mayardit, the government of South Sudan and its people are committed to peace, stability, development, and prosperity. Less than 30 days, as you remember, since the start of the conflict, the heads of state of IGAD convened emergency session and drew a roadmap for peace. I just would like to enumerate how far, if you look around the conflicts on our continent, how far in the Republic of South Sudan, the response has been immediate. Within a year, in January 23, 2014, we signed the cessation of hostilities. Yes, indeed, there's violation here and there, but I can show you my government is committed to that. Two, on the 9th of May 2014, the government made a recommitment to the cessation of hostilities. On the 3rd, again in Addis Ababa, the 7th IGAD Heads of State meeting, His Excellency President Salva Kiir signed IGAD protocol as a basis for a peaceful political settlement. This is the willingness. Peace process requires patience. It requires patience so that the parties can reach an understanding. The government made many compromises to date, I can tell you, including the president accepting to once again work together with his former Vice President Riek Machar, of which the first request was a non-executive prime minister, which he later changed, under the chairperson of His Excellency President Museveni of Uganda. In Kampala, the president engaged in reconciliation dialogue with the former detainees. This is a thrust towards the peace process. Again, President Kikwete of the United Republic of Tanzania, Arusha, initiated that brought all the parties to the conflict under the auspices of 4 parties in the area to reunite the SPLM. The CCM Party of Tanzania, the ANC of South Africa, the NRM of Uganda, EPRDF of Ethiopia, that resulted in a successful reconciliation and reunification of the party. All this, ladies and gentlemen, is being worked out in order to end up with a comprehensive peace agreement. Chinese initiative by its foreign minister, Wang Yi, actually had a commitment in the Republic of Sudan in Khartoum. Now, all these, ladies and gentlemen, are pushing forward the peace process. So what we require of you is to assist this process of humanitarian balance, which will push forward the peace process. On our part as a government, what have we done? Custom policy, we are all giving tax exemption to all humanitarian agencies. We are providing emergency visa to all those who will be processing work permit for those involved in humanitarian work. The government also has made efforts to facilitate all humanitarian corridors for relief and transportation. The NGO coordination desk has been formed by the government to make it easy for the aid workers to work. Humanitarian agencies have access to all areas, including the areas under the control of the government. So in conclusion, Your Excellencies, on my part, I would like to reflect that the Republic of South Sudan is not immune to conflict, as we have seen most debilitating conflicts in the rest of the continent of Africa. We are all gathered here, including the international partners of goodwill, to bring about sanity and end the sudden loss of lives and immense suffering of innocent women and children. These are our mothers and sisters, and we want an end to it. In this regard, I would like to thank all of you here today to put together in a spirit of collaboration, in a spirit of coordination of humanitarian aid, constructive engagement with dignity with the government institutions and its people, the management of all these challenges. This will also strengthen our resolve to ensure that our commitments to peace in South Sudan will be realized, and I can assure you my government is convinced to bring peace with the purpose of creating a peaceful, stable, and reconciliatory South Sudan, where humanitarian disasters will only be a part of our sad history and never be repeated again. And I thank you for gathering here in the name of my people and in the name of our country. Peace is around the corner, Your Excellencies. I thank you.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. We're now going to see a very short video which will highlight the humanitarian crisis. And I'm going to turn over to our humanitarian coordinator, Mr. Toby Lanza.
Thank you very much, and it's good to see so many friends and supporters here. You know the numbers, 2.5 million, 2 million, 1.5 million, 500,000, it's all a lot to take in, but behind every number there's a face and there's a voice, and I'd like you to be transplanted from this room back to South Sudan to take a look at some of the faces and the voices, and if we could dim the lights, please watch the video.
The children of South Sudan have suffered severely because of war. Some have lost their parents. Others were separated from their parents. The conflict affects everybody, the young one and the old one.
Thank you very much. We can put the lights back on, and let me just make a couple of comments on behalf of the aid community on the ground in South Sudan. We are ready. Last year we managed to reach millions of people in over 200 locations, and as we speak, the rains have stopped, the roads have dried, and our trucks are underway. And the World Food Programme, to give you an idea of the extent of this, is rolling with 335,000 metric tons of relief items. It is a massive effort, and we count on the full support of all the authorities, including in Rumbek and including in all of the areas where the state is currently not present, to enable our trucks to keep rolling. The systems are in place and the teams are there, and Forrest Whitaker and Valerie Amos saw them in northern Jonglei with us yesterday. Dedicated teams on the ground in the most deep field locations in places such as Y and countless others. And we count on the donors to continue to uphold your principles of good humanitarian donorship. This year, we need $1.8 billion to get people through this crisis, whether there is peace today, next week, next month, or in 6 months. Unfortunately, the damage has been done. So, by getting us $600 million in the month of February of this year, you will have kick-started the Said operation, got it in the right direction, and then I would like to keep monitoring the situation very closely and working closely with you as we move through March, April and May and see where things stand then. Thank you very much for standing with the people of South Sudan.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to ask the UNESCO Special Envoy, Mr. Forrest Whitaker, to make his remarks.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Mahbub bin Mamalim, Ambassador Amina Mohammed, Undersecretary General Valerie Amos, Director General, Excellencies, Ministers. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank the USG Amos for inviting me to be here and to take a part in this important discussion on the future of South Sudan. Undersecretary General Amos and I have just concluded a 3-day mission in that nation where we spoke with ambassadors, political leaders, visited with humanitarian workers, South Sudanese citizens whose lives have been upended by this conflict. Millions are still displaced. Millions are hungry. Thousands of schools across the country are closed as children go without education, they go without basic needs. The needs are immense, and the human suffering is unbearably real. For 14 long months, the people of South Sudan have endured the trauma, and they've done so with strength, resilience that truly moves me. Because even though they have borne so much pain, they've experienced and witnessed unspeakable atrocities all throughout the country. The citizens I talk to and the young people I work with maintain the fervent hope that one day soon they will live in a nation of peace. Their spirit convinces me that peace is possible. I do not believe the darkness of war can triumph over a collective will for peace and light this strong. Martin Luther King said it. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. Just like the people of South Sudan, who maintain such undying hope in spite of this terrible conflict, we cannot give up. IGAD and the international community must be relentless in the calls for humanity and peace. Because our fate, the fate of Africa and the fate of the world, is inherently tied up in theirs. We're seeing this in real and tangible ways. We see 500,000 individuals have fled the violence in South Sudan, seeking refuge right here in Kenya and other neighboring countries. This is not a South Sudanese crisis. It's not even an East African crisis. This is a human crisis, and we all have a role to play in bringing it to an end. In the words of Kwame Nkrumah, the forces that unite us are intrinsic and greater than the superimposed influences that keep us apart. So to the millions who wait for action in South Sudan, and to the billions who look on from all corners of the globe, we must pledge that we will continue demanding that leaders sit down at the table. We will continue gathering and organizing humanitarian aid. We will continue doing everything in our power to help the people of South Sudan endeavor through this dark midnight of violence toward the waiting daybreak of peace. But we must also consider that at this sort of dawn, the peace that we and the people of the South Sudan work to build cannot be just a negative peace. It cannot just be an absence of fighting. It cannot just be an absence of child soldiers. It cannot just be an absence of hunger and poverty. True peace isn't just the absence of bad things. True peace is positive peace. It's the presence of good things. A positive peace entails not only an absence of fighting, but the presence of dialogue and mutual respect. A positive peace entails not only an absence of child soldiers, but the presence of education and reintegration programs for children who have been scarred by conflict. A positive peace entails not only an absence of hunger and poverty, but a presence of sustainable development and economic growth. And most importantly, a positive peace is a stable and enduring peace. After months of violence and suffering, the people of the South Sudan deserve not only a temporary reprieve from the darkness, but a new dawn of peace that will last for generations to come. Thank you all for all that you've done to work towards these goals. And thank you for continuing the work on the behalf of the South Sudanese people. Thank you very much.
Mr. Whitaker, thank you very much indeed for those wise words, but also for your unwavering commitment. And before I hand over to my co-chair, I'm going to make one announcement which will make me deeply unpopular. We are extremely short of time, so I would ask all of you to please stick to your 2 minutes when we start. I will also ask if you would resist the temptation to applaud, even if someone makes a huge pledge, because it takes up time, so save the applause to the very end. I am the one who is monitoring, so I am the bad person here. My co-chair is the good person. I'm going to hand over to him. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Baroness. I think we're going to go straight into the speaking list, and allow me to start with the chair of the Executive Council of IGAD, represented by Ambassador Nagash of Ethiopia. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, Ministers, Your Excellency, Ms. Sarawak Zaude, and the Secretary General for UN Office of Nairobi, Your Excellency, Ms. Valerie Amos, and the Secretary General for the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Your Excellency, Ambassador Mahbub Malim, Executive Secretary of IGAD, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege for me to be here today representing my Foreign Minister, His Excellency Dr. Tedros Adhanom, Foreign Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, would have very much liked to be here among you. He regrets that he could not be present personally for this important high-level event. He asks me to offer his best wishes to all of you and for the successful outcome of the meeting. May I also take this opportunity to express our appreciation to UNOCHA and IGAD for taking the initiative to jointly organize this event at a very critical juncture when the growing humanitarian crisis in South Sudan demands more than ever before an enhanced global response to address it. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's about 1 year and 1 month since the outbreak of the conflict that caused this devastating humanitarian crisis, the worst in the history of this newly independent and young nation. In terms of the figures, the crisis has produced so far over 500,000 South Sudanese refugees seeking shelters and protection in neighboring countries, while the number of internally displaced persons exceeds 1.5 million. The impact of this distressing humanitarian situation on the sub-region are obvious and real. In fact, addressing the impact of the crisis in terms of economic burden, security, and environmental degradation on the states neighboring South Sudan require the continued engagement of the international community in the provision of resources and other forms of support. Ethiopia, being the largest refugee hosting country in Africa, is hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees from neighboring countries. Out of the total number of refugees, which is over 650,000, according to the United Nations and other humanitarian agencies, the figure of South Sudanese refugees is over 250,000, with the number increasing on a daily basis. Likewise, Kenya and Uganda are also sharing the burden in a significant way. It's also expected that the influx of refugees will likely continue unless a negotiated pacific settlement of the conflict is reached. We are hopeful that the South Sudanese political leaders will narrow down their differences based on the recent concluded agreement in Addis Ababa to establish a transitional government of national unity. Obviously, and given the grave humanitarian situation, this challenge can only be addressed through prompt and effective assistance from the international community. It is in this spirit that we, IGAD member states, are taking part in this event. More significantly, as neighbors, IGAD countries recognize their special responsibility in contributing to this global effort to extend our support to sisterly country of South Sudan in its hour of need. We finally believe that the collective response to the appeal for assistance today will be a clear demonstration of the consciousness of the international community of its responsibility during such humanitarian catastrophic situation and its solidarity with the suffering people of South Sudan. Let me in this regard, as the current chair of IGAD and on behalf of the governments and the peoples of IGAD, express our heartfelt gratitude to friendly governments, international organizations, especially OCHA, UNHCR, WFP, and other concerned UN organs, NGOs who have contributed generously to the humanitarian relief efforts in South Sudan. We particularly appreciate the Troika, US, UK, and Norway for their continuous support to IGAD-led mediation to resolve the conflict, which would, we believe, address the humanitarian crisis in a fundamental way. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's indeed very encouraging for us in IGAD to see that donors and other humanitarian relief organizations have come forward to help the victims of this humanitarian tragedy and have contributed wholeheartedly for their relief. We are confident that this support and goodwill to assist the South Sudanese refugees and internally displaced persons will continue with today's additional pledge to address the urgent resource requirement for the next 6 months in order to avert the highly possible logistics nightmare that would come with the rain denying access to reach the needy people. Equally, the resource needed for the rest of 2015 is critical to address the humanitarian relief in a comprehensive manner. This generosity is all the more appreciated in view of the tragedy that the people of South Sudan have endured till date. In closing, I would like once again to reaffirm Ethiopia's continued commitment to and support for our brothers and sisters in South Sudan, and would also wish to reiterate the full cooperation and support of IGAD countries to these resource mobilization efforts worldwide. I thank you very much.
Thank you. May I now go straight to Minister Okello of Uganda? Minister Okello, you have the floor. And kindly, I want to join the co-chair to be a little bit. What did she say? She said she was going to be not very famous. What did you say? I said I was going to be a bad person. But I want to join her being bad. If you don't mind, let us just skip all the salutations and all the other protocol. You don't mind. Let's just go and read the message if we can keep time. Thank you.
My sister and Honorable Minister and Host Minister Amina Mohamed, Cabinet Secretary for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade of the Republic of Kenya, colleague ministers of IGAD, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, and my special applaud goes to Mr. Forrest Whitaker. Uganda welcomes the convening of this high-level event on the humanitarian crisis in South Sudan, and therefore commends the IGAD Secretariat, OCHA, and other stakeholders for the initiative. As alluded to by the previous speakers, and as demonstrated in the video caption, the humanitarian situation in South Sudan remains grave. Not only are populations suffering from a myriad of effects associated with the conflicts in the country, they are also enduring hardships and plights far too long. Uganda commends OCHA for its unrelenting efforts to mobilize the international community in support of humanitarian activities in South Sudan. The support by partners and the contribution by humanitarian actors on the ground are equally commendable. However, the gravity of the situation remains and requires redoubled efforts and resources to assist the affected population out of this plight. Significantly, we all know that the humanitarian situation obtaining in South Sudan is a consequence of the current political crisis in the country. Therefore, the primary responsibility rests on the belligerent parties in South Sudan to end the fighting and reach political settlement under the IGAD-led facilitation. It is expected that the South Sudanese parties will buttress the commitments they have so far entered, including the cessation of hostilities agreement and the recent work-in-progress agreement on formation of a government of national unity, by reaching a comprehensive agreement at the final session beginning on 19 February 2015 in Addis Ababa. The conflict must stop. I repeat, stop, as it has caused untold suffering to the people of South Sudan, including deaths, injuries, displacements, and the humanitarian crisis we are focusing on today. It has obviously also impacted in the region, especially neighboring countries, in terms of refugees, disruption of normal cross-border activities, and loss of business. In Uganda, we are hosting over 200,000 South Sudanese refugees, and daily many continue arriving. We have provided them with land for camps, and others are allowed to dwell spontaneously with the Ugandan population. And in collaboration with UNHCR, government is providing all the other possible assistance to make their temporary stay humane and safe. This continues to have a bearing on the national budget, especially in terms of security and administrative costs. UNHCR itself is stretched in terms of the resources required to sustain the growing numbers of refugees. Under the public-private partnership arrangement, a task force is in place to mobilize and transport humanitarian assistance to the suffering and displaced population in South Sudan. The dispatch so far are sizable, and we pledge for further enhancement of the assistance. For the immediate, South Sudan needs more humanitarian assistance to address the plight of the many IDPs and refugees, and it's important that we as members of the international community respond positively. Ultimately, the sustainable solution is to stop the conflict and embrace a political settlement by the South Sudanese parties. In this respect, Uganda continues to play a constructive role with other members of IGAD so far, so that a permanent solution is found without any further delay. I thank you.
Thank you. Minister Kamal from Sudan, thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dear Excellencies, the Ministers and the distinguished representative, all the protocol observed, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I am delighted at this opportunity to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to the IGAD and the United Nations, UNOCHA, for organizing this high-level event on the humanitarian situation in the South Sudan. I would like to thank all those who have contributed and have been contributing in the efforts of reaching political, security and humanitarian stability in the Republic of South Sudan, which has assisted and continue to assist in alleviating the suffering of the affected people inside and outside South Sudan. Sudan has continued to Excellencies, Sudan has continued to contribute with the rest of the neighboring countries and IGAD in the effort to reach stability and sustainable peace in South Sudan and support all initiatives in the regional and international fora. Ladies and gentlemen, as a result of the security situation in South Sudan since December 2013, and it is a humanitarian repercussion, a number of affected South Sudanese people have entered Sudan, which has reached by the end of Sudan. Most of them are children, women, and elderly across the southern states of Sudan. About 120,000 South Sudanese have been settled in White Nile, South Kordofan, and West Kordofan, while about 38,000 settled in Khartoum state. The rest are scattered in different parts of Sudan. The government of Sudan opens its border for South Sudanese affected people and speed up the provision of emergency humanitarian assistance and the necessary protection through the provision of food, shelter, and health services, especially the vaccination of children and registration of the affected people and providing them with ID cards. With the increasing flow of the affected South Sudanese, the government of Sudan issued the necessary directives for treating them as citizens within the framework of the Four Freedoms Agreement between the two countries: freedom of stay, own, move, and work. And because they are our brothers, This status, rather than treating them as refugees, gives them with a much better position to take advantage of all rights available to Sudanese citizens and the other options for return, resettlement, or integration, in the line with the Sudan government national policy in this regard. It is worth mentioning that there are about 78,000 stranded citizens of South Sudan who have not been able to return after the separation due to the security and humanitarian situation in South Sudan. Some of them are gathering in open areas in Khartoum. They have been supported by humanitarian assistance and necessary basic services. There are about 50,000 children who are receiving education in different public institutions out of the total number of the South Sudanese in the Sudan. The government, in coordination with national and international partners, made all the necessary arrangements to voluntarily resettle the South Sudanese in safe and suitable areas for permanent residence, as well as providing them with means of livelihoods in partnership with the host community. The government also allows those who want to go to the areas where they lived before the separation. Some of them returned to their homes, especially in Khartoum state. Within the framework, the government of Sudan effort to stabilize the humanitarian situation in the state of South Sudan, the government signed in August 2014 a memo of understanding with the government of South Sudan for a 6-month period for the passage of humanitarian cargo from Sudan to South Sudan for a total of 62,000 metric tons of food items by the World Food Programme. The memo of understanding was renewed for another 6 months up to June 2015. By the end of January this year, 2,500 metric tons of food aid was delivered. A tripartite joint committee of the two governments and the WFP is overseeing the implementation of the MOU. Furthermore, the Sudan government has been actively involved in the support of regional and international efforts to stabilize the humanitarian situation in South Sudan. Indeed, it must commend the role of IGAD and its international partners on the effort and initiatives undertaken to bring back security, peace, and stability to the Republic of South Sudan. Your Excellency, in spite of the above-mentioned concerted effort made by all parties, the challenge remains is how to maintain the stability of the humanitarian situation and reach durable solution for those affected people. In this regard, the government of Sudan confirmed constantly its effort to provide the necessary protection and facilitate the delivery of humanitarian services through joint effort with national and international humanitarian partners.
Excellency, I have
just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. According to the need assessment carried out by the humanitarian partners, the fund required for 2015 is about $152 million US for the following areas: enhancing the response through the ongoing humanitarian intervention by provision of food, shelter, and protection; strengthening the basic services, health, water, and education, and livelihood projects and infrastructure; provision of favorable environment for the delivery of humanitarian assistance to the South Sudan through the smooth implementation of the MOU between the two countries. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I reiterated my thanks and appreciation for giving us the opportunity to participate in this meeting, and I would like to reaffirm the commitment of the government of Sudan in supporting the ongoing effort at its own level and platform to achieve political and security stability in the Republic of South Sudan. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We're now going to call the US, followed by Norway, followed by the UK, followed by the IPF.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank the chairs of this meeting for bringing us together in Nairobi to address the ongoing man-made humanitarian crisis in South Sudan. Thank you also to Minister Amina Mohammed for the warm welcome, to Toby Lancer for his very powerful video, another powerful video, and to Forrest Whitaker for his personal efforts to help. The American delegation is very proud of your very genuine interest in this and your presence here today. So thank you. As Valerie Amos knows very well, we currently face a long list of global disasters, conflicts, and disease outbreaks, yet none fills us with as much frustration and despair as the crisis in South Sudan. Why is this? Because this crisis should never have happened. The warring parties share the full responsibility for the violence that has engulfed much of the country and for the suffering of their fellow South Sudanese. We call on all parties to the conflict to end the fighting now. We are disappointed and dismayed that the government and opposition failed to reach a meaningful agreement during the latest negotiations at the African Union Summit. Although the parties pledged to resume talks in late February, that is already too late for the people of South Sudan. And even as we seek to save lives and ease suffering while demanding a peaceful resolution, it is already clear that the conflict will have long-term effects on livelihoods, food security, and South Sudanese institutions. The United States and other donors are here to try to help the people of South Sudan, who continue to suffer and die unnecessarily because their leaders have been unwilling to do what it takes to restore peace to their country. South Sudan is the most food insecure country in the world, with parts of the country teetering on the brink of famine. Nearly half of the people in the states most affected by conflict are facing crisis and emergency levels of food security. In areas ravaged by violence, farmers cannot plant or harvest their crops. As we've heard, over 500,000 South Sudanese are now living as refugees here in Kenya and in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Uganda. The willingness of these countries to take them in has saved many lives and is laudable. Aid workers are doing all they can to help millions of people. Their efforts, supported by the US government, other governments, and aid donors, have helped stave off famine, saved lives, and provided food, shelter, safe drinking water, health care, and psychological support. But resources are limited, and many victims of South Sudan's violence are struggling. They're living in terrible conditions and hardship. The United Nations and IGAD were right to call us to this important event to highlight urgent humanitarian needs and to keep our attention focused on the plight of the South Sudanese people. To underscore the US government's long-standing commitment to the people of South Sudan, I am announcing today that my government is providing an additional $273 million in humanitarian assistance for those uprooted and imperiled by the conflict in South Sudan. With this additional contribution, U.S. assistance to the people affected by this crisis inside South Sudan and in neighboring countries has reached nearly $1 billion. Imagine if that kind of money had been spent on developing the new nation of South Sudan. Instead, we are simply seeking to keep people alive, too often in miserable conditions. The programs these new funds support will be implemented by neutral and impartial United Nations agencies and other international and non-governmental organizations. The additional money is needed because, as we have heard from so many already this afternoon, the situation and the needs are dire. Our commitment to the people of South Sudan remains steadfast, but we know that aid alone cannot address the underlying political problems that are preventing peace and stability. This aid can only be effective if South Sudan's leaders end their intransigence and promote the well-being of their people, rather than their own rivalries and political machinations. We share the vision and ardent hopes of South Sudan's people for a peaceful, unified, democratic state. They have suffered too much and deserve, at last, to have their rights protected and to live free of fear and violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the announcement of that significant additional contribution and for leading the way with the pledging. Norway.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, after more than 1 year of conflict, nearly 2 million South Sudanese are displaced from their homes. The conflict is tragically destroying people's livelihoods. The economy is on the verge of collapse, the humanitarian situation seriously deteriorating, the human rights situation precarious, the oil production is in rapid decline, the debt is rising, and the conflict is inflicting serious damage on the economies of neighboring countries. Norway remains deeply concerned with the humanitarian situation in South Sudan, the large number of IDPs and refugees, the high food insecurity, and the difficulty of getting assistance to areas where it is most needed. The government of South Sudan has the primary responsibility to assist and protect its own people. The government should ensure rapid and unimpeded access to the affected populations through humanitarian agencies when the government is not able to deliver these services itself. 2.5 million people are at risk of facing high levels of food insecurity over the next few months, and the figures might be even higher for the rest of the year. Increased and immediate efforts are necessary to provide life-saving assistance to vulnerable populations in South Sudan. Since the conflict broke out, more than 1.5 million vulnerable people have had to flee their homes in the country. Women and children are particularly vulnerable and in need of immediate protection. In addition to the overwhelming needs in South Sudan, there are huge needs for South Sudanese refugees in neighboring countries. Over 490,000 people have fled to Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Sudan since the outbreak of violence in December 2013. I would like to extend Norway's appreciation to these countries in the region that have let their borders stay open to incoming and vulnerable refugees from South Sudan. Last year, Norway contributed a total of $78 million to humanitarian needs in South Sudan. How the money was channeled is publicly available and has been shared with the South Sudanese authorities. And there is an urgent need for more funding. Our government is therefore announcing today that we are contributing an additional 150 million Norwegian kroner, that's approximately $20 million to the South Sudan crisis response. IGAD has created a venue for you, the leaders of South Sudan, to take bold decisions to achieve peace, to serve your people, to secure social and economic development for future generations. The world now expects you to show responsibility as political leaders and do what you must to avoid war and further destruction. The people of Sudan, and indeed the whole world, expects, urge, and demand that you take such a responsibility for the fate of the people of your country. Show leadership, agree on peace, and establish a transnational government of national unity. This is the only way to turn the tide before it's too late. We are worried about the massive human rights violations taking place in this conflict. The reports of mass killings and the level of sexual violence is shocking. We believe that publication of the findings of the African Union Commission of Inquiry is necessary to ensure that such violence against civilians, including women and children, cannot take place with impunity. It is my hope that this high-level conference will help make it possible to avoid famine and violence in the months to come. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that pledge. We'll move straight on to the UK, followed by the IPF.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, colleagues, the UK is also deeply, deeply disappointed that South Sudan's leaders failed to make the necessary compromises to reach a comprehensive peace agreement in Addis last month. The UK calls on both the government and opposition to return to talks ready to make the compromises needed and reach an agreement. With 2 million displaced, tens of thousands dead, and the country now also facing an economic crisis, South Sudan's leaders need to put their differences aside and secure peace for the people of South Sudan. Peace is the only sustainable solution for the people of South Sudan to end this suffering. The fact that we are here today continuing to mobilize resources for a man-made crisis in a country with its own significant resources is indeed very frustrating. However, the UK continues to be committed to meeting humanitarian needs of the people of South Sudan, who are the victims of this man-made, expensive, protracted crisis. Since the beginning of the December 2013 crisis, the UK has committed almost £200 million sterling to humanitarian partners to alleviate the suffering of the South Sudanese. And over 90% of this money has already been dispersed, including a timely contribution of £50 million right at the end of 2014 to take advantage of the 2015 dry season, which we hope will allow for more lives to be saved going forward into 2015. And we hope that this early financing will make a critical contribution towards averting a famine this year. We also recognise the immense effort and resources from the humanitarian community, all the humanitarian aid workers, including the very brave South Sudanese aid workers, civil society, neighbouring governments and their host communities, and I think particularly their host communities that helped avert a famine last year and supported those refugees. The UK calls upon the government of South Sudan to fulfil its responsibility towards its own people, not only by ending the conflict, this is the cause of so much suffering, but as promised in Oslo, by contributing more of their own resources towards meeting the vast humanitarian and basic service needs of their citizens, and of course facilitating unhindered humanitarian access. I can assure you that the UK will remain a committed partner with significant humanitarian funding through the year and at the right times to take advantage of the dry season. A stronger commitment from the leaders of South Sudan will only make it easier to make the case to the UK public for continued support. And finally, I want to emphasise that strong control of the macroeconomy will also be essential. I know this is a humanitarian and not an economic conference, but it's clear that inflationary and out-of-control deficit financing will only serve to drive up food prices and compound the very difficult situation facing the people of South Sudan that we are meeting today to address. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I have the IPF followed by Qatar and Japan.
If there's a representative of the Italian government, okay, proceed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me, first of all, to express my appreciation for IGAD and OCHA for co-hosting and organizing this conference. It is in fact of the utmost importance that we continue to remain focused on this humanitarian plea, whose impact goes well beyond the South Sudanese borders and affects the entire region. We cannot afford the risk to see South Sudan becoming a forgotten crisis, and as it has happened in the past in other areas of Africa. We should not repeat the same mistake. It is therefore of paramount importance for the international community to renew today here in Nairobi our firm commitment to provide immediate relief assistance to the civilian population and identify additional steps in order to ensure their protection. This is what we call the humanitarian imperative, saving lives and protecting the dignity of people wherever it is necessary, and doing it in accordance with the principle of neutrality, humanity, independence, and impartiality. In this respect, allow me to remember that much work still needs to be done. We need to work hard in terms of advocacy, recalling to all sides the need to comply with the principle of the international humanitarian law in order to have access to the victims of the crisis and provide relief assistance aimed at reducing chronic vulnerability. Italy is deeply concerned with the dramatic deterioration of the humanitarian situation in South Sudan and will spare no effort to bring help where the need is most acute, also in its capacity of co-chair of the IGAD Partner Forum. In May 2014 in Oslo, we committed a total amount of 3.5 million euro, out of which 2 million euro have been already disbursed to support crucial humanitarian interventions carried out by World Food Programme, UNHCR and UNICEF, whereas the remaining share of 1.5 million is going to be disbursed in the coming weeks on the bilateral track, taking into account the results achieved with the previous initiative and the historical presence in South Sudan of a wide network of Italian NGOs. As regards 2015, I am glad to announce today that, despite our financial constraints and the extraordinary proliferation of emergencies at global level, Italy will increase its humanitarian commitment for South Sudan. Pending the final decision by the Parliament on the allocation of the resources of the Italian development assistance, due to take place in the next few days, we cannot give a precise figure, but I wish to ensure that the total amount of our financial commitment will be approximately of 4.5 million euro. Out of this amount, 2 million euro will be channeled at the bilateral track, while the remaining 1.5 million will be disbursed in favor of the international organization, both of the UN system and of the Red Cross family, active in the field. Furthermore, we will also disburse a contribution for a total value of 1 million euro to support IOM's psychosocial assistance in favor of the most vulnerable categories of the IDPs. Allow me finally to conclude by saying that despite our effort, there cannot be a humanitarian solution to the crisis of South Sudan. Only politics, diplomacy, and continuous dialogue can put an end to the inhumane suffering of thousands of innocent civilians and bring a durable solution to the conflict. And let me remind to all Sudanese leaders that their primary responsibility should be the promotion of the safety and well-being of their people. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, the world's youngest country has already a long history of suffering. Let's us all work together to facilitate a speedy political solution to this terrible conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I have 20 more speakers, so a reminder please to try to keep to time. I have Qatar, followed by Japan, followed by Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will deliver my statement in Arabic, so I hope it will not take from my 2 minutes. Just to put the handset. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أود في البداية أن أنتهز هذه الفرصة لأتقدم بالشكر لجمهورية كينيا والإيغاد والأوتشا على دعوتهم الكريمة لهذا الاجتماع. أصحاب السعادة، إن الأزمة الإنسانية في جنوب السودان قد تسببت في مشاكل وآثار إنسانية عميقة نتجت وأنتجت ثائر إنساني
has caused tremendous suffering and losses of life since the civil conflict has started. Those who have suffered most are women and children. We are meeting here today at this high-level meeting in order to translate our commitment into the field and to reiterate our intentions in order to help those who are suffering in South Sudan. On the basis of the vision of the state of Qatar, that is, in humanitarian initiatives in order to accelerate the resolution to this problem, Qatar is working in order to provide humanitarian aid in a certain number of countries throughout the world by means of emergency aid and also encouraging the efforts towards peace consolidation. We participated in the Oslo Donor Conference in May 2014, and the state of Qatar committed $10 million in order to cope with the crisis in South Sudan, including malnutrition of children and improvement of the drinking water situation. With the World Food Programme, we have also organised other projects in order to be able to provide this aid. With the Red Cross in Sudan, we have also worked with them, and we have distributed food aid and products in South Sudan and have contributed to water projects in this part of the south of Sudan. We should also like to mention a certain number of projects aimed at improving the provision of aid. The state of Qatar is undertaking all possible efforts to bring an end to the crisis in South Sudan and to find mechanisms to do this. In conclusion, I should like to repeat my thanks to the government of Kenya as well as to IGAD and UNOCHA for having been good enough to organize this meeting, and we would wish you every success with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Japan.
Well, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Japan pays tribute to all the efforts by the United Nations and related international organizations, especially IGAD, for its tireless effort for the mediation of the South Sudan political process, and appreciates the partial agreement on the establishment of a transitional government of national unity. The coming few months are most critical, and Japan strongly hopes that the both parties reach a final agreement while paying full attention to the humanitarian crisis on the ground. Japan's basic position on the support for South Sudan has been unchanged. That is, to help them in their nation building. This we have done through dispatching our self-defense forces to UNMISS and through our ODA, Official Development Assistance, which was suspended for security reasons. I'm glad to tell you that the preparation for resumption of our ODA for the national building of South Sudan is steadily underway. As for the new pledge, I have the honor to announce today that the Japanese government has decided on February 3rd that it pledges the amount of $88.47 million for the new humanitarian funding for South Sudan and for the neighboring countries. Out of this amount, $61.32 million is to South Sudan itself for humanitarian purposes. Japan sincerely hopes that this new assistance package will be beneficial to the people of South Sudan, particularly to the youth and women, to help them freed from the humanitarian crisis. Japan also hopes that the development of South Sudan will be advanced by the hands of the people of Sudan themselves. Also, $27.15 million is for the humanitarian assistance to the neighboring countries such as Ethiopia, Sudan, Uganda, and Kenya. Japan looks forward to seeing concrete progress occur in the political process so that South Sudan and the neighboring countries can enjoy dividends of peace. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that pledge. Canada.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Congratulations to all of those who have pledged so generously today. As you know, this same group sat in a similar room in Oslo approximately 9 months ago, hosted by the government of Norway. The good news post-Oslo, famine was averted. I think also access has improved significantly, thanks to the diplomacy of OCHA and thanks also to cooperation by the government of South Sudan. But there's no getting around, there is a lot of bad news. The numbers, as you know, are now approaching the darkest years of Sudan's civil war. Also, at Oslo, all donors pleaded for serious counterpart funding by the government. Canada fears that this has not occurred. Furthermore, at Oslo, we were given assurances of full accountability. We have seen no accountability for the atrocities that occurred in December, January and February. The African Union's Commission of Inquiry has been shelved sine die. That is a great disappointment. We fear that without accountability and justice, there can be no sustainable peace agreement in South Sudan. We also note that shortly after Oslo, IGAD countries indicated sanctions would follow cessation of hostilities violations. The monitoring and verification mechanism of IGAD has indeed documented such sanctions. Assurances, with the greatest respect, assurances that peace is close are not enough. I'd like to echo the bishops of South Sudan from about 10 days ago who called on the leaders of South Sudan to take risks and think the unthinkable. Canada will not pledge today. This is not because we are not committed. In 2014, one of the darkest years in South Sudan's history, we opened an embassy, symbolic, but more importantly, we delivered $45 million worth of humanitarian assistance, and we continued with development programming to the tune of $55 million in the areas of child health and food security. We will continue that commitment. But are we tired? Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much. May we now have echo.
Thank you. We are here today to take stock of where we are in our preparations to meet the humanitarian challenges in South Sudan in 2015. It is the dry season now, and we have an opportunity to access remote communities by road and to prepare for the lean season. We should take full advantage of this opportunity. However, it is perhaps worth reflecting briefly on the tragedy of the situation of South Sudan. Despite being richly endowed with natural resources and with a young, eager and energetic population, the world's newest country finds itself barely 3.5 years after independence on an international life support system provided through one of the largest and most expensive humanitarian operations in the world, plus an equally costly peacekeeping operation. This is above all a man-made crisis, a betrayal of the hopes and aspirations of the people of South Sudan by its own leadership. Most recently, at the end of January in Addis Ababa, we saw yet another opportunity to move forward, squandered in spite of the patient and committed facilitation of the negotiations by regional organizations and others. Leaders of all groups and parties should go beyond their short-term interests and make the necessary compromises for peace, for the benefit of all the people of South Sudan. It is essential that the current negotiations are completed no later than 5th of March. The EU supports the IGAD-led process and encourages a closer involvement of the international community. In particular, it supports repeated IGAD and AU warnings that if the two sides continue to violate the ceasefire mechanism or fail to finalize a political agreement, appropriate sanctions will need to be adopted by the international community. Because the government has so far not met its obligations towards its population, it is the international community that keeps the children and women of South Sudan from starving, from dying of treatable diseases, from utter destitution as they are driven from their homes by armed men, as well as assists those that feel compelled to seek asylum in neighboring countries. The response of the EU to the humanitarian crisis has been significant, and the manifestations of the generosity of European taxpayers, despite three facts: the severe economic crisis affecting much of the European Union, the competition with other humanitarian crises throughout the globe, and the frustration of witnessing avoidable human suffering as a direct result of the delays from government and opposition to commit to inclusive and sustainable peace. Last year, the European Union committed more than 116 million euros of humanitarian assistance. This year, we are starting with an initial budget of 57 million euros for humanitarian operations inside South Sudan and an additional euro 13.5 million for refugees in neighboring countries. This will be in addition to significant contributions from individual European Union member states. These funds are for the innocent victims of the crisis of South Sudan. They will be provided directly to experienced and capable international relief organizations so that we can be sure that those with the most urgent needs receive maximum benefit. As for the leaders in government and opposition-controlled areas, we would urge them to consider carefully their obligations to respect the dignity and sanctity of human life and to respect the livelihoods and property of their citizens. We also ask that they do not obstruct or seek to gain advantage from humanitarian assistance, which is serving the sole purpose of alleviating the suffering and threats to life of their own people. Finally, we would like to pay tribute to the countries of the region for having kept their borders open and welcomed the South Sudanese refugees, as we acknowledge that this influx is coming on top of an already very significant refugee caseload in the countries of the Horn. We can only plea for the host countries to maintain this asylum space open, ensuring additional land allocation and continue facilitating the delivery of humanitarian assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, EU ECHO, for that support and the pledge. May we now have Sweden, Switzerland, Denmark, and Netherlands in that order. Sweden, Switzerland, Denmark, and Netherlands, please. Sweden.
Excellencies, all protocols observed. Sweden remains very concerned about the situation in South Sudan, with predictions of alarming food insecurity levels for this year, continued displacement, not least affecting neighboring countries, for example, Kenya, a fragile political landscape, and the threat of an even larger outbreak of violence. Sweden consequently wholeheartedly supports the IGAD-led mediation and the efforts by the African Union as well as other actors in this regard. Accountability, reconciliation, and an end to impunity will be crucial in order to achieve a sustainable solution to this wholly man-made crisis. Let me note that Sweden is particularly worried about the situation for women and children and the prevalence of sexual and gender-based violence. Humanitarian operations must from the very outset take into account the needs of women and children and seek to empower women. Women's role in management and resolution of conflict and sustainable peace must always be taken into consideration for a truly inclusive political process to be achieved. Sweden was the world's second largest donor to the SERF as well as to the Common Humanitarian Fund in South Sudan in 2014. And in the same year, in 2014, Sweden was the fourth largest bilateral donor of humanitarian aid to South Sudan with a disbursement of approximately $62 million. For 2015, Sweden has initially pledged $21 million for the humanitarian response to crisis in South Sudan and its regional impact. We, however, stand ready to increase our support at a later stage. Finally, Excellencies, let me note the following for the record. Sweden and other members of the international donor community has, since the beginning of the current crisis, time and time again shown great commitment to the people of South Sudan. What the international community, and far, far more importantly, the people of South Sudan now rightfully expect is for the government of South Sudan, as well as other actors in the conflict, to show a similar degree of commitment to the well-being of the people of South Sudan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's have Switzerland.
Thank you, Ambassador Mahboub. Ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland remains committed in 2015 to supporting the vital international humanitarian effort in South Sudan. This year we plan to disburse an amount that is comparable to the one we spent in 2014, and that is about 18 million Swiss francs for humanitarian purposes. It is the people of South Sudan, the women and children, as well as the elderly, who are the prime victims of a man-made disaster, the responsibility for which lies with those few who chose to resort to the path of violence. The effective protection of civilian population has to remain a priority for all parties in the conflict. Switzerland is deeply concerned with the slow progress with respect to reaching an agreement for the sake of peace. We more than regret the hesitant commitment shown by both conflict parties as regards engaging their own resources for humanitarian purposes. We urge both parties to respect a cessation of hostility to which they have recommitted several times already. The risk of donor fatigue is real, and the conflict parties must be aware of that. We are convinced that there can be no lasting peace without truth, justice, and accountability. The citizens of South Sudan have a right to know who is responsible for their misery. We commend UNMISS for its well-documented human rights reports and urge the AU, that I see is not represented here, to release the report produced by the Commission of Inquiry on South Sudan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. May I call upon the representative of Denmark?
Thank you very much. All protocol observed. Thank you very much to UNOCHA and IGAD for the continued and tireless efforts in regards to South Sudan, and for also calling for this very timely conference. 2014 was indeed a challenging year for the population of South Sudan and for the neighboring countries. Denmark remains extremely concerned of the humanitarian situation and of the suffering of the people of South Sudan. Concerning food insecurity for millions of people, the sexual and gender-based violations affecting many women and the children recruiting as child soldiers are just some of the many areas and basic needs of the population which we are concerned about. Denmark remains committed to alleviating the humanitarian suffering of the South Sudanese people. Earlier in 2015, Denmark has committed 82 million Danish kroner, approximately $13 million US, to humanitarian relief and efforts through our strategic partnerships. We expect to soon be able to commit more to this humanitarian operations of South Sudan. We also second the calls from many of our other colleagues sitting around the table for durable and lasting peace to come soon to South Sudan, and for the parties to the conflict to prioritize the needs of the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I call upon the representative of the Netherlands, please?
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, well, we'd like to thank OCHA and IGAD for organizing this meeting and all their efforts for South Sudan. We also regret to have to discuss a man-made humanitarian disaster. Warring parties are responsible for humanitarian costs of the tragedy. We had hoped that last week's negotiations and the IGAD summit would have brought more results. We strongly urge all parties to reach as soon as possible a comprehensive agreement. In this process, we cannot forget justice and accountability, for which the report of the AU Commission of Inquiry will be important. Sadly, the government of South Sudan continues to spend so much of its resources on its security apparatus and ever less on essential social services to its citizens. As some of you will know, this situation prompted my government to freeze its direct support to the central government. We would love to see this government transparently to address mounting macroeconomic and fiscal challenges, especially given the drop in both oil prices and oil production, and thus reduce current human suffering and financial crisis. Meanwhile, the Netherlands continues to support the people of South Sudan and all national and international humanitarian workers. This year, we contributed more than 217 million euros in unearmarked funding for humanitarian aid by the UN or renowned organizations such as the ICRC. Given the great needs in South Sudan and its neighboring countries, a sizable amount of this will be spent in South Sudan. In our initial planning for 2015, we've also allocated 13.4 million euros of earmarked funding for the delivery of humanitarian aid in South Sudan. 9 million arrived hopefully at the CHF by the end of February, early March. This brings the total Dutch contribution to the crisis in South Sudan since the conflict erupted late 2013 to 44 million euros. Finally, humanitarian support does not bring any sustainable solution. We all expect now a commitment from all parties to end their conflicts and to bring peace and development to the people of South Sudan.
Thank you very much indeed for that continued commitment. I'd like to call next Australia, followed by Germany, Ireland, and then the Kenyan Commercial Bank. Australia.
Thank you. Australia thanks OCHA and IGAD for convening this conference and for their unfailing efforts to mitigate the situation in South Sudan. Like many others, we are also deeply disappointed that we meet again in the absence of a political settlement to this conflict. Australia continues to call on South Sudan's leaders to prioritise the well-being of their people and to bring the conflict to an end. Australia commends the robust humanitarian response which narrowly averted a famine in South Sudan in 2014. But the humanitarian situation remains acute, thanks to the cumulative effect of conflict, impeded access, and the disruption of planting and harvesting activities. We are concerned about the increasingly regional dimension of both the conflict and its humanitarian impacts. In recognition of the significant burden shouldered by Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda and Sudan, I am pleased to advise that Australia will contribute $5 million Australian dollars to the UN South Sudan Regional Refugee Response Plan through the World Food Programme. This funding is provided to dispense critical food relief for refugees displaced by the conflict. This contribution brings Australia's humanitarian assistance to South Sudan since independence to over 63 million Australian dollars, in addition to our ongoing provision of airlift support and troops deployed within UNMISS. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the announcement of that contribution. Germany, followed by Ireland.
Excellencies, I would like to thank UNOCHA and IGAD for convening this meeting at a very critical point in time for the people of South Sudan. 2014 has put the people of South Sudan through a lot of misery. I would like to applaud the United Nations system and the humanitarian NGOs for averting a famine and saving countless lives over the past 13 months. Germany is proud to have been a part of this effort by providing around $123 million for humanitarian and development assistance in 2014. Germany calls on the leadership of both sides of this conflict to put an end to a war that they both have said is senseless. The people of South Sudan deserve better. They need peace. 2015 must bring a new start for South Sudan. We do not need more roadmaps. The people of South Sudan need a peace agreement, and they need its implementation. Last year, our overall contribution on the humanitarian side amounted to more than 24 million US dollars. Additionally, we provided humanitarian assistance of around 4.5 million US dollars to South Sudanese refugees in Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia through our international and NGO partners. While today we are not in a position to make a new pledge, Germany is committed to continue its humanitarian assistance in 2015 at a high level. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Ireland.
Thank you. Ireland commends the IGAD and UNOCHA for convening this meeting today. We want to acknowledge in particular the substantial assistance being provided by Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda and Sudan in affording shelter, protection and food and services for those displaced by the conflict. We also want to recognise the brave and effective work of humanitarian agencies and local international NGOs in responding. Like others, Ireland remains concerned about reports of the continued conflict and the violations of international humanitarian and human rights laws, including killings, sexual and gender-based violence, the recruitment of children, torture and the destruction of property. Ireland is also concerned about the slow progress in reaching a comprehensive political agreement. We strongly emphasise the importance of political commitment to bring a resolution to this conflict and the political responsibility to ensure structures are in place to bring humanitarian assistance to over 2 million people, as we've discussed. In response to this situation and the need for immediate and urgent financial assistance, Ireland today is pledging a further €3 million to the United Nations Common Humanitarian Fund for South Sudan. This funding announced today affirms our confidence in the UN Common Humanitarian Fund as a mechanism for effectively channeling financial assistance to meet humanitarian needs of displaced populations. This announcement brings Ireland's funding for the last 14 months to over €14 million for South Sudan and includes funding for refugees in bordering countries. These funds have been directed through the CHF mechanism, but also through international and Irish-based non-governmental organisations working in the region. They are in addition to additional funding through pre-positioned emergency supplies and technical assistance which has been provided. Ireland remains fully committed to supporting efforts to end hostilities towards a sustainable peace, and in particular to continue to effectively respond to efforts to alleviate the suffering and restore the dignity of those most affected by the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the announcement of that additional contribution. We have the Kenyan Commercial Bank, followed by Egypt and then South Africa.
Good evening, everyone. All protocols observed. On behalf of our group, CEO was not able to be here this afternoon with you. He has passed his regards, and so I'll be able to give the pledge for the bank. KCB is actually one of the first regional banks that was established in South Sudan in the year 2005, and we have continued to do business there. And today we have actually 21 branches in all the 10 states in South Sudan. And part of our strategy is actually to have a long-term commitment to support growth and development in the country that will spur economic prosperity for the nation. But of course, with the latest events that happened there, this dream again seemed not to be able to prosper. But again, we have hope and we continue to serve in South Sudan. We have not closed our operations. We have continued to be there. We have had very good support from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also our embassy there that has been able to support us on the ground to be able to provide financial services even during this crisis to the remotest parts of the country. Today, we have also closed 3 branches which were burnt down during the strife in 2013, the towns of Bor, Bentiu, and Malakal. But still, we shall go back there once the situation improves. We shall be able to go back and operate once more. But our other 20 branches continue to operate, and we continue to give services. And the majority of our employees, of course, come from the community, and therefore their hope really is to see that peace is established so that they can continue to see the country prosper. In line with our vision of investing in our community, today we are pledging a donation of Kenya shillings 10 million, which is $109,000 towards the humanitarian crisis in South Sudan. And we hope that through this partnership, we shall be able to realize the objective of getting the services to the people of South Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for that significant contribution to the people of South Sudan. Egypt.
Sayyida Safira Amina Muhammad.
Your Excellency and Kenya, Mrs. Valerie Amos, Mr. Mahbub Muallam, Executive Secretary for the GAD, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. Egypt was one of the main countries that respected the will of South Sudan and supported its independence and supported it economically, politically, and development-wise. As the Egyptian government have signed different memorandums of understanding with the government of Sudan in developing electricity and water resources and agriculture, infrastructure, and other fields as well. Egypt pays great attention for the political and security stability and improvement of conditions in South Sudan, because this has its impact on the region and the continent of Africa as a whole. Hence, Egypt has participated strongly in the peace work between Sudan and South Sudan, and we have established different field hospitals in these areas. Also, we want to participate in the new peace mission. In addition, Egypt participated with the government of South Sudan in order to establish 4 power stations, and we digged 12 wells for underground water. And we have agreed with Egyptian companies in order to design and establish civil airports in different cities of South Sudan. Egypt was very interested in providing different humanitarian assistance since the independence of South Sudan. Particularly, we are participating in helping Sudan to confront this crisis. We have sent different relief to South Sudan, and Egypt is supporting all international efforts in order to alleviate suffering from the refugees and the people of South Sudan, and we are supporting United Nations and the IGAD in this. Ladies and gentlemen, Egypt continuously is supporting all efforts for reaching a peaceful settlement in South Sudan, and hence we do welcome the initial agreement that has been signed in Addis. And we hope that this would be followed by serious steps and tangible ones in order to improve the political and economic situation and to elevate the sufferings of different people in order that they would be able to go back to their houses.
The video which was played for 3 minutes, I believe that the children need more than just $1.8 billion. They need to have a reason to live. واتصالا بما سبق فإننا نأمل أن تتاح لنا.
According to this, we hope that we would have the opportunity today in order to know more facts concerning what is taking place in South Sudan and the international efforts that are exerted in this concern. Also, we are looking forward in order to assist South Sudan in order to alleviate the suffering of our people there and the mechanism by which we can implement such assistance. We are looking forward as well that our meeting today would put a limit for this suffering and this deterioration, and that people in Sudan would avoid their sufferings and to be prosper economically and socially. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our colleague Ambassador from Egypt, South Africa, followed by Finland, and then Brazil and China.
Thank you, Chair. We didn't request the floor to make a statement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and sorry for that mishap. Can we get Finland, followed by Brazil and China?
Thank you, Chair. We have gathered here at the critical moment for the aid operations in South Sudan. I congratulate IGAD and UNOCHA for your leadership and all the humanitarian actors for your tireless efforts in bringing life-saving assistance to the people of South Sudan. It is remarkable that despite the extremely challenging situation in the field, you were able to surpass your target and reach over 3.6 million people in need of assistance. In 2014, South Sudan was the second largest recipient of Finland's humanitarian aid, totaling to close to 9 million euros. The first funding allocation round of 2015 will be finalized in a few weeks' time, after which we will be able to confirm the level of Finnish support for the beginning of this year. At this stage, I can assure you that Finland remains committed to providing humanitarian assistance to the people of South Sudan in need of assistance. I would also like to join my colleagues who had congratulated and welcomed IGAD's tireless efforts in facilitating the talks between the parties. In this respect, the agreement signed in Addis Ababa on 2nd February needs to be followed by concrete and immediate measures to end the conflict with a comprehensive peace agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. First place, Brazil appreciates the fact that IGAD and the UN convened this high-level meeting to follow up with the humanitarian crisis and aid to South Sudan. Brazil extends all its sympathies to those affected by this crisis, especially children and women, who are the ones who suffer most. But in this sense is that the president of my country, President Dilma Rousseff, instructed me to especially announce here a contribution in kind that is made available to the United Nations World Food Programme, addressed to the most affected by the conflict. In this sense, Brazil has made available 4,530 metric tons of rice and 4,800 metric tons of beans to be delivered through the World Food Program of the United States to the most affected population in South Sudan. We would also appreciate the collaboration of other partners in the international community to carrying this contribution so that it can reach the World Food Program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. China.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, we thank UNOCHA and IGAD for organizing this very important event. And China has always paid close attention to the situation in South Sudan and played an active role in advancing its peace process, social and economic development. Only 3 weeks ago, our Foreign Minister, His Excellency Wang Yi, attended the special consultation in support IGAD-led South Sudan peace process in Khartoum, and important consensus were reached, including concrete measures will be taken to facilitate the timely delivery of humanitarian assistance. In the field of aid to South Sudan, the Chinese government has finished construction of Labaki Hospital, schools, well drilling and water supply projects, provided massive material aid including tents, blankets, anti-malaria medicines, and dispatched medical teams and trained over 670 senior officials, technicians. More projects, including construction of schools and the installation of solar traffic lights in Juba, are under implementation. All these projects have made significant contributions to South Sudan's poverty reduction, living condition improvement, economic and social developments. After the humanitarian situation in South Sudan worsened in December 2013, China was among the first to provide humanitarian aid and assist the government of South Sudan to relocate and relieve the victims and the refugees. Up to now, we have donated foods, medicines, tents, blankets, and other materials worth 140 million RMB. And the Chinese government will continue to provide humanitarian aid to support the international efforts to relieve humanitarian crisis in South Sudan and meet the demand of medical care and basic living requirements of South Sudan people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May we now get to a national NGO called SADO, followed by UNHCR and MSF, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be a part of the gathering in which the plight of the people of South Sudan is a purpose. It gives me hope as a national of South Sudan that in spite of the various global tragedies that call for international attention and support, you have chosen not to ignore or forget the plight of the people of South Sudan. My name is Elijah Manyok. I'm the chair of the National NGO Steering Committee of the South Sudan NGO Forum. I would like to start with a famous quote from Dr. Grant, who said, "Peace will bless us once more, with hearing of happy giggling of children and the enchanting ululation of women who are excited in happiness for one reason or another." This unnecessary war have robbed the people of South Sudan of the very human right that was envisioned by Dr. John Grant in his quote delivered at the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in Nairobi, Kenya in 2005. Let us not rob the people of South Sudan with their dignity, right to clean water, shelter, healthcare, livelihoods, and education. This critical moment for the aid operation in South Sudan, investing in assistance in the first quarter of 2015 is a smart way to provide funding, comparably to the winter sale, as the cost increase exponentially when the cargo has to be transported by air during the dry season. As we work toward saving lives and alleviating suffering for 4.1 million people, protecting the right of affected population, including women and girls who are the victims of gender-based violence, and improving the self-reliance and coping strategies we must keep in mind the four messages below. First, the importance of engaging the full potential of South Sudanese national NGOs in the humanitarian response. There are over 200 national NGOs in South Sudan operating in over 90 locations across the country. As a local actors, we experience the conflict as both the victims and the first responders often in emergencies. Their understanding of the country dynamics and the unique positioning across the country is essential, and yet the national NGOs constitute only 1% of the strategic response plan fund allocation. Investing more in national NGOs through financial assistance to respond is more strategic and effective way of supporting South Sudan humanitarian response in 2015. Secondly, it is essential that the message of reaffirming and reinforcing the commitment to respect the humanitarian apparatus and staff, regardless of whether they are South Sudanese national or not, emphasize to both government and the opposition forces. The continual harassment and forced recruitment of NGO staff, illegal checkpoints, and taxations are all violations enforced by both the government and opposition forces that infect the work of both South Sudanese organizations and international NGOs and must stop. Third, the sustained resilient building is vital to South Sudan, and the pledge committed here today should be able to respond to the emergencies in the 3 directly affected states in the armed conflict, and as well as 7 states with relative tranquility but affected by the spillover from the 3 states. Lastly, restoration of peace and security in South Sudan is essential to the future of the country. As a South Sudanese, it is very disheartening to see how low our leaders have stopped and how insensitive they are to the plight of their fellow countrymen and women. The continued recommitment of violation of cessation of hostilities agreements by the parties to the conflict, the adamancy of the field commanders to considering peace, and the recent refusal by the African Union Peace and Security Council to publish the Commission of Inquiry report or reflect the complete disregard to the value of South Sudanese life, dignity, and rights. This message, continued echoed by the people of South Sudan to the parties in the conflict, remains. We are your children, your mothers, fathers, friends, and relatives. We have jointly struggled and suffered for over 50 years to gain our hard-earned independence. Please hear our voice and cry and stop the war now. We don't deserve this punishment. With that said, I would like to appeal to the concerned citizens of the world to pledge generously. It is unfortunate that we are here once again mobilizing money not for development but for humanitarian emergencies. It remains our prayer that one day soon, happy giggling of children and enchanting relation of women, as envisioned by Dr. John Garang, will be a reality to all of us. Never again shall our people die of hunger, disease, and war if the parties to the conflict are willing to stop this war now. God bless you and God bless South Sudan.
Thank you so much. UNHCR.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of last month, there were 632,000 South Sudanese refugees in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Sudan, and in Uganda. 500,000 of these people were displaced in the last 12 months of the year. This means that the fractures of an independent South Sudan displaced its own citizens, more of them in 12 months than in the entire 2 decades of the civil conflict. At current rates, by the end of this year, there will be no less than 840,000 South Sudanese in refuge. In Oslo in May last year, the humanitarian coordinator, Mr. Toby Lanza, entreated several times that never again should another generation of South Sudanese be lost. Yet today, 7 out of 10 South Sudanese refugees are children. There is a total of 35,000 of them in these 4 countries that are separated from their families, from their relatives. The Constitution of South Sudan cements a primary position for women in that country. Yet today, 80% of all the refugee households are headed by single females. From August last year to the end of the year, most of these people were flooded in unviable and extremely painful refugee conditions. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the 39 agencies that came together to devise the refugee response plan, and together we have asked for $810 million, The High Commissioner, on whose behalf I speak here, would like to thank all who have made donations and pledges for us to help these people better. On our part, we can pledge that as far as possible, we will continue to respond to the humanitarian imperative. But as we have heard, there is the responsibility to prevent, the responsibility to stop violence, and above all, the responsibility to solve. For that, like others who have spoken in this room, UNHCR looks to the leadership of the South Sudanese people to bring a better future for them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, my brother Obo. Let me have MSF.
Thank you. My name is Will Robertson from MSF. A medical and technical focus will always be a very poor substitute for a political and social remedy. But as we look to another difficult year, MSF wishes to highlight 3 medical humanitarian reflections. These reflections are born from our accumulated experience of 3,500 health staff in South Sudan. 1, a nationwide disrupted health system. 2, the humanitarian aid should not be used for political purposes. 3, regional access to and from South Sudan is needed to assure protection and assistance to all refugees. The health system, number 1. For decades, access to health for the people of South Sudan has been a massive challenge, but this crisis has made it even more acute. The dysfunctional system extends beyond the conflict that affected states. In health terms, we have witnessed this in our 40-plus health facilities. In 2014, we treated a 3-fold increase in malaria cases, creating a heavy hospitalization rate in our facilities. Interestingly, this was most heavy in the non-conflict affected states. One element to consider is the impact of the weak logistics system, even to these quiet locations in 2014. This needs to be dramatically improved in 2015. Similarly, for Kal-Azar, we treated over 7,000 cases, and again, there were very limited treatment options, with drugs in many other facilities absent. Collectively, we have also dealt with other outbreaks like measles and hepatitis with some success. And while large-scale cholera was averted by effective and timely response, it was also helped by a vaccination campaign. We would like to call for a strengthening of the preventative vaccination schedule to deal with the more mundane but commonplace killers that can now be stopped by new antigens, like the pneumococcal vaccine. Therefore, it's imperative that donors focus on what is effective health assistance and also being prepared for the seasons as they come. The second reflection, humanitarian assistance in this context has a long and troubled history. All actors must focus towards humanitarian aid being independent from a political agenda, both from belligerents and also from within our coordinating response mechanisms. Humanitarians need to be first and foremost make decisions for quality program based on the needs of people, not on political or military leverage or on the institutional needs of our agencies. 3, a regional perspective to access must go beyond food delivery if we are to respond to the needs of the refugees displaced into neighbouring countries. Our success as MSF has been varying, and this is somewhat also felt by the experience of the whole community and can be seen in the dollars spent per head in each receiving country. Access to South Sudan and from South Sudan to neighbouring countries must be eased and facilitated. For instance, we remain very concerned for our failure to gain access to South Kordofan, where South Sudanese refugees must now also deal with an increase of fighting in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MSF. May we have ICRC?
Thank you very much. I thank our hosts for organizing this high-level event on the humanitarian crisis in South Sudan and its impact in the region. I also thank you for the opportunity to address you here today. On behalf of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, the ICRC, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, and all national societies concerned, we call upon all parties to the conflict to respect and comply with the provisions of international humanitarian law. in particular to protect the civilian population and those who are no longer involved in fighting, and to ensure the security of humanitarian actors and medical staff. We call also on the international community, all member states, to ensure that international humanitarian law is indeed respected by the parties and that the humanitarian efforts of all humanitarian organizations are fully supported. As a result of prolonged conflict, disrupted markets and poor harvest in the majority of the states, South Sudan is approaching a more severe and longer hunger gap, with evidence of increased food insecurity and nutrition needs. Access to the wounded remains difficult, and life-saving help is not always provided on time in conflict areas due to active fighting and insecurity. Therefore, we call on all parties to the conflict to grant humanitarian actors an unhindered and timely access, including across existing front lines, to deliver emergency supplies to people in need, provide life-saving help to the wounded, and render protection services. This includes the timely provision of authorization and security guarantees for field movement. Every day, many volunteers from the South Sudan Red Cross are delivering essential services to affected population without discrimination, in a neutral, independent and impartial manner. They are able to reach out to conflict-affected people in areas accessible to few or no other actors. The Red Cross, Red Crescent movement partners are working together to support the South Sudan Red Cross, the world's newest national Red Cross society, in its response to immediate needs, while promoting community-based initiatives. Building such local capacities and ownership is a key element to ensure a sustainable and effective approach to meeting the needs of people in South Sudan today and in the future. We stay strongly committed to provide the victims of the conflict, be it internally displaced people, vulnerable residents or refugees in neighboring countries, a robust humanitarian response standing on three pillars: calling for respect and protection, providing emergency assistance, and ensuring early recovery and resilience support whenever possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call upon UNFPA. We have two more speakers of the UNFPA. Let's keep it up time. Let's aim at finishing the next 15 minutes, including the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The urgency of dealing with the 3.8 million refugees cannot be undermined. The urgency to deal with the scourge of sexual and gender-based violence cannot be ignored. The urgency to deal with the tragedy that unravels every day for close to 42,000 women who are expected to give birth, but invariably lose lives while giving life. What we are seeing in South Sudan is a cocktail of complete disasters. Some of us who've served there many, many years ago just see the unraveling of this utterly heartbreaking. But the most important part over here is to ensure that the fundamental aspect of society, the protection of women and children, remains non-negotiable. So I would continue to urge the international community, donors, and of course all parties to the conflict to ensure that one of the most marginalized and vulnerable parts of the South Sudanese population are catered for. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that brief statement. Let me now call upon CARE International on behalf of the Interagency Working Group, followed by World Bank.
Yes, on behalf of the Interagency Working Group, which is comprised of 60 international organizations working in the region, I would just like to reiterate the strong calls here that we've heard for peace. It is only when the violence stops that the full and lasting protection of South Sudanese lives and rights, wherever they are, can be assured. We also appreciate the funding for the refugees in the hosting countries who have to live with the reality of a very long-term displacement and therefore will need longer-term support for both livelihoods and self-reliance programming. And finally, in order to scale up the regional response, we would like to highlight that the continued and growing violence along South Sudan borders and the need to improve cross-border access and the movement of humanitarian goods. Thank you.
Thank you very much, World Bank. And then I have been forced to add one last speaker, not the list, Safaricom. That was care. World Bank followed by Safaricom, because we may be out of phone service if we don't. So World Bank, Safaricom.
Thank you very much, Chair, ladies and gentlemen. I think we are all very much agreed on the extent of the tragedy in South Sudan and how devastating it is and how the human cost is simply unacceptable. But it is so heartening to hear about the success of the humanitarian relief efforts. My warm congratulations to colleagues in the UN and across the international community for the excellent work that's been done with the generosity of international donors. I wanted to highlight two things. One is just the impact of the current oil price shock and how that could reverberate further in South Sudan, given the looming humanitarian crisis, and then think about how some of the responses from the World Bank which complement the humanitarian efforts. I think what we'll see as a result of the oil price shock in South Sudan, where I think you'll know that prices have dropped from $110 now to around $58 today. South Sudan is the most oil-dependent country in the world, and it'll be hit harder by this shock than probably any other country. And when we relate that to the situation, the issues that we're talking about today, we're seeing that obviously government revenues falling. The availability of foreign exchange to purchase imports will also contract, and we know that South Sudan imports around $1 billion of food every year. So I think we're going to start to see this unfolding as well in the South Sudanese economy. We're already seeing inflation back at around 10 to 20% a month in food prices, which will affect the functioning of markets where most South Sudanese they're still reliant on for their food. And I think we'll see poverty continue to rise. We've seen the compounding shocks of the oil shutdown in 2012, the conflict that ran through 2014 and continues, and again with the oil price shock, we're simulating in the World Bank rises in poverty across both rural and urban areas as a result of these compounded shocks. So no good news on the economy, but it will actually make this humanitarian situation more difficult on the basis of our predictions. Looking ahead, I wanted to say something about the humanitarian development links, and which I think we need to keep a focus on. Then I'll say something about how the World Bank is contributing.
I need you to do that in exactly 60 seconds, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, let me say quickly then that obviously the full financing of the humanitarian appeal is key, but as is the responsible macroeconomic management in order that the situation shouldn't be worsened. Continuing to maintain roads, investment in roads to keep them open will be key, as well as in agriculture, food production. For the World Bank, while we're not a humanitarian agency, we are continuing to engage in social safety nets, and we have a program of $21 million coming online. We also have new investments of $50 million in road upgrades and $50 million in food security and agriculture to complement the humanitarian efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Safaricom.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Excellencies. Safaricom is a Kenyan telecommunications company that is deeply committed to deploying its technology for change and transformation. We firmly believe that now more than ever, business must work alongside the state, and indeed at forums such as this, to play our role in peace and sustainable development. In that regard, we pledge further to commit to mobilizing the Kenyan business sector to support this initiative. Being a Kenyan company with our jurisdiction of operation and support being limited to Kenya, we are, however, committed to supporting the response to the crisis in South Sudan as follows. Firstly, we will deploy and use our telecommunications network to enhance communications, peace and security around border areas and within and around refugee settlements. Secondly, with our firm belief that we must protect and promote the rights of the vulnerable and the displaced, we will work alongside UN agencies and contribute towards improving the quality of life of the people of South Sudan within Kenyan refugee settlements. We will do this through the deployment of products and services, partnerships and programming, geared to improving health, education standards, livelihoods, and to support return and reunification efforts when there is peace. The in-kind value of this commitment is the equivalent of US dollars 150,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I will, in concluding remarks, say three things. One, thank you all for your time, for your generosity, and tell you how delighted I am in such a successful pledging session, despite the fact that our request to you was very short notice. Two, recognize the fact that there are many, many other unsung heroes in the room who have not spoken, but who are also partners in the field of the humanitarian activity. Dr. Abbas Guled is one of them. I saw him somewhere this afternoon. My brother Negatu from African Development Bank, and many more who have not taken the floor. Thank you so much. We are together in this. And lastly, and not the least, I have learned with regret that the co-chair, Her Excellency Baroness Valerie Amos, Under Secretary General, and the Emergency Relief Coordinator of the UN, is very soon about to leave her position. And we in IGAD, she has meant a lot to us. We've done so much work with her and with her organization in her tenure and these difficult times of the resilience system. And the Committee of Directors of IGAD have seen it befitting to award her an IGAD Medal for Distinguished Humanitarian Service. And I would like to award that to Annie. I hand over to Baroness Abbas.
I'm so overwhelmed I want to burst into tears. My fellow co-chair, Ambassador Malim, thank you very much indeed, and thank you from IGAD for a very, very special honour. Thank you. And before I sum up, I know that Foreign Minister Mohammed would just like to make a few concluding remarks.
Well, thank you very, very much. I would like to thank the two co-chairs for having organized this wonderful and excellent meeting. Let me say this, that I would be very reluctant to allow everybody to go away feeling that nothing has really happened for the 1 year that IGAD has been involved in South Sudan. So I'm going to say three things that we at IGAD look at as successes, small but all the same, successes that will help us, I think, get to where we need to be hopefully in the next few months. First, we have noted, and I hope that you'll also note this, that the conflict has actually not spread since we got involved. So the conflict has not spread. Secondly, the humanitarian space was placed right on the negotiating table. So it has always been there. It's something that we have discussed from the first day that we went as foreign ministers to South Sudan 3 days after the conflict broke. The third thing is that even though it's been very, very, very difficult to do this, but we have been able to ensure that the region is not pulled into conflict. And so we've been able to ensure that even though there have been a lot of noises, that the region itself is not pulled into conflict, and all of us in the region have supported the peace process. Fourth, there has never been, I think, in the history of any peace processes and negotiations, such sustained engagement by heads of state and government. We've had 8 summits so far. And so I don't want anybody to leave brokenhearted, frustrated that nothing has actually happened. A lot has happened. Not enough, not enough. We want much more to happen much faster. But we have made some achievements. We've been able to get to a place where we can actually contain, to a large extent, the situation in South Sudan. And lastly, what I really wanted to say, before I said all this, was to thank Baroness Valerie Amos, because I also heard that she would be leaving soon. And I really think that we've had the most phenomenal Undersecretary for Humanitarian and disaster relief. Thank you so, so much for all the efforts that you put in, for your commitment. I don't think we will forget this, but I also know that you will not forget us and that you'll continue working with us.
Including South Sudan.
Even after your retirement. Thank you very much.
Over to you.
Foreign Minister Mohammed, thank you very much indeed, and my thanks to, for both of those tributes, and you both know how much this continent is in my heart. So whatever I do next, and I have to say I don't know, so if you know of any things coming up, do let me know. Whatever I do next, I know that it will in some way involve working on behalf of the people of this continent. I just wanted, if I may, to say a few words by way of summary. First of all, a huge thank you to IGAD for the continued and tireless efforts to secure a lasting peace in South Sudan, and to the African Union and international community for their continued efforts as well. A huge thank you to our donors. There have been some very clear messages, I think, from today's conference, very consistent messages. The urgent need for peace and for the government and opposition to put their people first, about concern about the unfolding economic crisis and the critical importance of dealing with that, concern that whilst humanitarian aid is saving lives, longer-term development of the country has been put on hold because of the violence, and this needs to be urgently addressed, and concern about the impact of the fighting on vulnerable groups, particularly children and women. I'm delighted to announce that we raised approximately $529 million this afternoon. If we add that to announcements that were made at the beginning of the year by some countries, it brings the total so far this year to around $618 million. Now, I said at the beginning that we needed to raise $600 million by the end of February. So we have reached that target. A huge, huge thank you to all of you for the fact that we have done that. My thanks to everyone who participated and pledged so generously, and some of you indeed said you weren't able to pledge today, but will pledge very shortly, so those numbers will rise. I also, if I may, would like to very much thank the IGAD team, the UNOCHA team, our colleagues here in UNON, who helped us to organize today at such very short notice. And just finally, a huge thank you to the people of South Sudan, who, despite all of the difficulties, remain courageous and remain resilient. Thank you very much indeed.